take it away.
Okay. So yes, hi everybody. Will Lighthizer. I'm here to talk about guidelines and best practices in the context of using AI for user research. Um, so in terms of this presentation today, I'm going to keep it pretty high level. I think a lot of these things are more grounded in user research, but do apply to like our broader UX team. Um, And I'm not going to focus on a lot of the like kind of nitty-gritty aspects of AI, partially because AI itself moves so fast. Uh, you know, something like this deck could easily get outdated in like a couple weeks to like a couple months. And so I won't be discussing any like tips or tricks or like use this model or use that model. So I'll keep it high level. And so I guess similar to Vithika's situation, I came back from parental leave earlier this year, and it felt like I was coming back to a different company because I was like, okay, we're using AI now. That wasn't a thing when I left. And so I met with UX research team, tried to get a sense of like, how are you guys using AI? Because I had not used AI outside of work. I was busy with the kids. And so I spoke with the team. I also reviewed a lot of like meeting notes, just to kind of get a sense of like how are people in product using AI for research purposes. I compiled a set of those. This is kind of like the updated output, but I guess unsurprisingly, AI is being used throughout the entire research, life cycle from start to finish, anywhere from, just kind of creating research plans and documentation to like reporting on insights and findings. And so when we think about that entire process from start to finish, it's really important to also think of the risk that's associated with using AI. And so in this case, you know, we're really leaning on the data and evidence from the research that we're doing to try to make good decisions that are going to benefit not only our company, but our customers and end users. And so if we lean on AI a little bit too much, especially the later we go in the research process, like the data analysis, synthesis, and also reporting and storytelling, if AI happens to be wrong in those phases or is giving us not the most accurate information, we could end up making a decision that's not in the user's best interests, and is not reflective of the data that we've actually gathered earlier on in the process. And so it's really important for us as we're going through and using AI, whether it is for design or for research, evaluating what's the risk of using AI at this particular phase or task. And so there's always going to be that trade-off of like, I could get this efficiency gain of like automating this thing with using AI, or I could do it manually. And so there's that trade-off there. Um, and so one of the key decision points is just understanding like when should I do this manually? When should I do this with, automation slash AI, or kind of a mix of the two? Um, and then one of the things to keep in mind is that when we're using AI, ultimately we're the subject matter expert on this. We're deeply embedded in our teams. We understand what's going on, the daily conversations that we're having with stakeholders. And so AI, we have to give it the context to be able to get a more accurate like output at the end of the day. But there's limitless context that we could provide that we may not be able to provide. And so it's really on us to be the kind of final decision maker on the content that it's providing us in the output. And so one way to frame our collaboration with AI is to think about it as a personal intern. And so whether you've worked with an intern or not, they tend to be new or kind of brand new into the company. So they don't have that previous context of like what historically has happened and like how teams are working together and what sort of relationships there are. And so because of that lack of context, they can end up making mistakes, and they need that context in order to provide more helpful outputs in this case. And so we have to use AI as the starting point and really leverage our expertise and our domain knowledge, whether we're in design or research, to refine that output. And so one way to do that is just by double checking its work. Um, One thing that I wanted to highlight is if you're using AI for data analysis and synthesis purposes for user research, it's really important to make sure to anonymize and remove any sort of personal data like PII before sharing it with AI. We've got so many different tools that we're using right now. All of us have got Claude, but there's Gemini pilots and soon to be like a Chat GPT pilot from what I've seen. And so we don't know what these tools are doing with our data. And so we have to be really careful from a security standpoint and compliance standpoint of kind of what we're providing. And so removing that information, replacing it with placeholders whenever we can, like participant one or company X instead of the actual company name, can help us kind of make sure that we're following the right standards. And if you do have any questions, we have our internal handbook and also the safe channel if you kind of have a question for your specific use case. One of the things that I also wanted to touch on is we've got a lot of different tools within our tech stack that are used for research purposes, like user testing, Dovetail, Rally, and some others. And these tools are starting to integrate AI features, or AI features have been around for a little while and they're kind of expanding. Our research team has tried to look into these features whenever we can, but we haven't been able to fully vet them. And so it's important to just take into account that these AI tools are very different from one another. And because of that, they can be inconsistent for various reasons. One of the examples that was reported by my colleague Erica is that like Dovetail was having some issues with like looking into a interview that she had done and spitting out certain insights of like what had happened in that interview, and it was like not reflective at all with the actual interview content. And so just be aware of that, and please let us know if you have any questions about certain tools or features. And so I know I've covered a lot of material in a short amount of time, but you may be asking yourself, like, okay, so you talked about risk. How can I address the risk? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Just being honest with yourself about how much am I using AI? Where are those knowledge gaps with like what tools or models or whatever it might be that's AI related that I'm comfortable or not comfortable with, and just trying to use it more just to get some level of comfort, but also, kind of educating yourself when there are gaps about, what are the capabilities and limitations of these different tools. One of the other things that I have seen and heard about within uh, the product design group is like just making sure that you're following up with AI when you're questioning like where did it get this information. You want to understand like a little bit of the kind of show me your work type stuff. And so asking it like, where did you get this quote? Where could you explain this? Like following up can certainly help as well. Because AI will often, you know, kind of correct itself if it notices like, oh, that was just a complete fabrication. Um, and then if you have any questions, we do have our UX research Slack channel. Some other resources I wanted to briefly highlight. Um, I on an earlier slide had showed all the different like use cases that we've been able to develop, and kind of where they fall within the research lifecycle. We've recently developed this issue within the AI at GitLab use cases um, project that has the specific types of use cases that we've vetted within our UX research team, and then provided some example prompts associated with each of those different use cases that can help you if you're ever stuck or just want some guidance. We also have the Research Smarter with AI series in the UX Research channel for more of those granular tips and tricks. And then Anthropic has a free course if you're wanting to kind of educate yourself more about Claude or just AI in general. They do have an AI fluency framework course that I've been taking that is really helpful, and I think kind of helps kind of bridge that confidence gap I talked about earlier. So I know I covered a lot of stuff. I'm happy to answer any questions or follow up on anything that you all might have to talk about.
Thanks, Will. Does anyone have any questions? There's nothing in the agenda at the moment. I recall reading that AI was adept at data analysis, but that was later on in your timeline when you were saying that that's when you should start to get, a little weary of how much you're using AI, more risk towards that end. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's something I've had conversations with like other researchers in my broader network about, because that's something where I'm a little weary of, because if it's giving you the wrong answer, um, it's something that you could make a bad decision on. Um, but from people in my network, they're actually using it more and more, just because data analysis and data synthesis take so long. Um, so it's something that I'm starting to like kind of be more comfortable with, but also have the caveat of like, I need to spend more time like manually checking the work, or at least spot checking the work to make sure that it's like giving me some accurate information.
Yeah,
So
it
I
feels
don't
like
have
there's
a ton
a
of experience with it myself.
yeah, it feels like there's a certain point where if you're having to spend X amount of time confirming that it's accurate, then maybe you should have just done it yourself. Like how do you balance the productivity increase with actually not having it in the end? Yeah, that's always a difficulty. I also was wondering if any of the hallucinations, while hallucinations, they're not necessarily accurate according to the data, but I wonder if the hallucinations are actually still technically correct. Like, do you agree with them? Being the SME, looking at what they made up, is it still a relevant input, or is it just totally off the mark? I've always wondered that.
Um, Sometimes it does sound so plausible because it is, you know, these tools are designed to be very confident in their answers. And so I even have to like check myself and go like, did that really happen? That sounds like, correct. But then like going into the day, it's like, oh, that doesn't exist. Um, Sometimes it's like there's data that's being fed to it in addition to just like the customer feedback that's like, oh, it's kind of latching on to like a little snippet that like I or somebody else wrote and kind of telling me what I want to hear. So kind of like confirmation bias
Right.
instead of giving me more of like an unbiased opinion on something.
Yeah, I can see that. I've also recall reading that it's really great, and I think we all sort of know this, that at getting over that white page syndrome. It's great for if you're planning on doing research, developing the assumptions that you might have. It will help you then figure out what you want to ask or what you want to dig into during that research. So at that very beginning stage.
Yeah. And that's where I
Um,
personally used it the most because I struggled with like just coming up with stuff from scratch.
all right, last chance. Does anyone have anything else they want to talk about from an AI research perspective? There are no bad questions. All right. Thanks, Will. I appreciate the talk. The links and resources that you referenced are in the agenda. So if anyone wants to dig into those, please feel free to check that out.